Good evening, everybody. I'm David Asman. Lou Dobbs has the night off. The government is heading for a partial shutdown in less than 5 hours because the obstinate radical Dems and rhinos in the Senate, led by Chuck Schumer and Jeff Flake, continue to stand in the way of the American public's will to build a wall.
As we said to President Trump a week ago, his wall does not have 60 votes here in the Senate, let alone 50 votes. That much is now clear.
What I wanted to do with not proceeding is to demonstrate that not all Republicans would be for the House bill either. There is no path forward for the House bill.
Meanwhile, President Trump today making it very clear that any shutdown is the responsibility of the Democrats in the Senate.
It's really up to the Democrats, totally up to the Democrats as to whether or not we have a shutdown. It's possible that we'll have a shutdown. I would say the chances are probably very good because I don't think Democrats care so much about maybe this issue, but this is a very big issue. They've devoted their lives to making sure it doesn't happen, and that wasn't for what should happen. That was for political reasons. It's up to the Democrats, so it's really the Democrat shutdown.
And as the Senate continues to negotiate, we will be following the very latest developments from Capitol Hill throughout this hour. We'll take it all up with political strategist Ed Rollins and House Freedom Caucus member Andy Biggs. Also, in another instance of judicial activism, the Supreme Court has denied the Trump administration's request to enforce its new asylum policy. The ever more left-wing Chief Justice John Roberts joining with the court's leftist wing to stop the administration from enforcing a process that would curb illegal immigration by only allowing asylum claims to be made at a port of entry. And is the Mueller witch hunt close to wrapping up? A new report suggests the special counsel is tying up loose ends and may issue his report in February. We take all that up tonight with former Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Andy McCarthy. And the red storm rising, China and Russia continue their aggressive posture in an attempt of global intimidation. Russia is testing hypersonic weapons that Putin declares have no foreign equivalent, while Chinese subs make progress on their nuclear strike capability. Asia expert Gordon Chang with us tonight with what America can do to respond. We begin tonight with our eyes on Washington, where a deal has yet to be made to avoid a government shutdown. Senate lawmakers, however, clearing a procedural hurdle this evening to take up a spending bill approved by the House and continue negotiation between Republicans, the Dems, and the White House. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts joining us tonight with more on the president's strategy.
David, good evening. It had been a high-stakes game of brinksmanship that had gone on most of the day. That now has turned to negotiation. President Trump had dug in his heels, insisting that he get some money for a border barrier. Whether you call it a wall or a steel slat barricade, it doesn't really matter. But now the question is, can he get an agreement with Congress before the midnight deadline of a partial shutdown? As he did yesterday with House members, President Trump huddled with Senate Republicans this morning, trying to find some way to get money to build a barrier on the southern border.
Tremendous enthusiasm for border security. And I think I can speak for them very strongly when I say they want to see something happen on border security.
The House last night passed a bill with some $5.7 billion for border security. President Trump today claiming just making that happen was a victory.
We've done our thing. When Nancy Pelosi said you'll never get the votes in the House, we got them, and we got them by a big margin.
But as Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell tried to muster the votes just to bring the House measure to the floor, the Minority Leader shut the door on the president.
There are not the votes in the Senate for an expensive, taxpayer-funded border wall. Abandon your shutdown strategy. You're not getting the wall today, next week, or on January 3rd when Democrats take control of the House.
President Trump dispatched Vice President Pence, his incoming Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney, and Jared Kushner to meet with Senator Schumer this afternoon to try to hammer out a deal.
Totally up to the Democrats as to whether or not we have a shutdown.
President Trump also did a 180 on the blame game, tweeting this morning that Democrats now own the shutdown, to which Senator Chuck Schumer was only too happy to remind the president what he said 10 days ago.
In our meeting in the Oval Office, President Trump said, quote, If we don't get what we want, I, President Trump, will
shut down the government for border security, Chuck, because the people of this country don't want criminals and people that have lots of problems and drugs pouring into our country. So I will take the mantle. I will be the one to shut it down. I'm not going to blame you for it.
As the clock ticks toward a midnight deadline, he appeared willing to take $1.6 billion in a proposed spending bill that was scrapped. But if Congress gives him no money for a border barrier tonight, Fox News is told he will let the partial shutdown happen.
It's possible that we'll have a shutdown. I would say the chances are probably very good because I don't think Democrats care so much about maybe this issue, but this is a very big issue.
Polling shows that the majority of Americans will blame the president and the Republicans if there is a partial government shutdown. But what President Trump really cares about is how his base will react if he does not stand on principle on one of the central promises of his election campaign. David?
John Roberts at the White House. John, thank you very much. Well, joining me now is Congressman Andy Biggs of Arizona. He serves on the House Judiciary Committee, the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, and he is a member of the House Freedom Caucus. He voted yes to fund the government and President Trump's border wall. And it's interesting, Congressman, that Senator Schumer didn't remind the president. Nancy Pelosi said such a bill would not pass the House. She was dead wrong on that one.
Yes, she was. And we proved it demonstrably yesterday with a magnificent vote. We really carried that across the line. And Mr. Schumer, Senator Schumer, he's, I think, in error here. It is his fault. I think that the Democrats are going to own this, and they should own it.
So now to bring it up to date, what happens if the Senate passes some kind of bill with wall funding in it that the president can accept? Would the House then accept that?
Well, it depends on how much that money is. I mean, look, a lot of us swallow it and we say we've got to see our spending a lot of money, but the border wall is so important. It's a national security issue. And if they come up and they say we're going to spend $2 billion for it, that's really not enough because it doesn't even get this thing going and off the ground. We still end up repairing where we've been repairing. We need the full $5 billion. I'd prefer $25 billion, which is closer to the actual cost. So we have to wait and see what the package looks like because we're hearing rumors, innuendos, all the things that make for good politics and good theater, but we haven't seen anything that the Senate's going to do yet.
You know, people want a secure border. It's as simple as that. They want a secure border, and yet it's not secure. Our facilities along the border are overrun. Our border agents are overworked. We need to do something. Has anybody on the Democrat side claimed that the border is secure, that it's not a problem, that no money has to be spent?
No. What they did is a few years ago, most of them voted for a wall and funding, but now they've changed their position, and now they prefer an open borders policy, and they're using this as a wedge issue. In reality, the problem is magnificent. I mean, I called Border Patrol agents just the other day to get an update, and we're seeing at that time there was something like 64 people in one group caught, and half of them going to hospitals. Another one, a Border Patrol Border Patrol agent was assaulted, his head split open by a rock by a Honduran illegal immigrant. These are the problems that they face on a daily basis where thousands are crossing the Arizona border and all across Texas, Arizona, and California.
What do Democrats say when you bring up these? I mean, you're from Arizona. You're from a border state. You have plenty of examples. You hear them. You're an eyewitness probably to some of these examples. What do they say? What excuse do they have when they refuse to fund any kind of securing of the border?
They focus on the issue of migrants, and we get it. Some of the places they're coming from are very difficult. Some of them don't have great jobs. But that's what they focus on. They don't focus on the problems that arise here. And I'm just telling you from a humanitarian point of view, there are literally hundreds of people who die every year trying to get across Arizona, Texas, and California's borders to come here. And I believe a barrier, I believe a wall would actually deter people from coming. And we know that because when the San Diego-Isidro wall went up, illegal crossings decreased by 85 to 90%.
That's exactly the point. Is that word? You know, it's amazing how word travels fast, particularly among potential immigrant communities. If the word gets out that things are easy up on the border, you'll get a rush of people going to border. If the word gets out that there's a wall, it's very difficult. People won't make the trek. It's not an easy trek. It's a very difficult trek. We don't want to underestimate the difficulties that these migrants go to, but they won't take that trek if they know that it's going to be almost impossible to get in.
That's right. There's a grapevine that goes all the way down to Central America. They know every time Congress even begins to talking about any kind of amnesty, we see a surge at the border because now they think, oh, if we can get here, we can get this amnesty. But when you saw a decrease in border traffic when President Trump came out at the beginning of his term and he's talked real tough on the border, people were very nervous. They were concerned. They quit coming. But I tell you, you've got cartels, you've got human smugglers, and these people are taking their lives into their own hands, and we need a border wall because it will deter that.
Congressman, very quickly, they're giving me a wrap, but do you think there will be a shutdown, a partial government shutdown, or do you think there's going to come to some kind of deal?
I believe there's going to be a shutdown. I hate to say it, but I believe there's going to be.
And will it be long, as the president suggests it might?
I believe it might be a number of days, yes.
Congressman Andy Biggs, we appreciate you coming in, sir. Thank you very much.
Thanks, David.
Coming up next, the radical Dems and the left-wing national media anticipating the end of Robert Mueller's witch hunt with a new coordinated mantra. Take a listen.
The walls are closing in. The walls are closing in on the president.
The pressure is definitely tightening. The web is coming closer and the walls are closing in.
The president is always on the attack, especially when the walls are closing in.
The walls are closing in on President Trump.
The walls are closing in.
It seems like he's in to echo Noah, he's in a full-blown panic here. The walls are closing in.
Such original thinking, huh? We're going to take that up and much more after. New reports tonight that Special Counsel Robert Mueller will be finishing up his investigation as early as February. Now, Mueller would then submit his report to the Attorney General. Mueller has presented no evidence to suggest President Trump colluded with Russia after a nearly 2-year probe. Our next guest says with respect to the president and collusion, Mueller does not have a crime he is investigating. He is investigating in hopes of finding a crime, which is a very different thing. Joining me now is Andy McCarthy, the former chief assistant U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York. He worked in that office for 18 years. Andy is now a National Review contributing editor, Fox Business contributor. It's those articles in National Review that I really look forward to and read voraciously every time I get them, Andy. First of all, you know, there are a lot of people who think, our friend Rush Limbaugh has said this on air, that as long as President Trump is president, Mueller will be around to investigate something because he is searching for a crime to get this president out of office. To which you say what?
Well, I think Rush is right that there are no parameters to the investigation and that as long as it goes on, it will be an unlimited hunt for something. But where I disagree with Rush is that to the extent he thinks it'll go on as long as the Trump presidency goes on, I think that what we're seeing is Mueller winding down. I think he's right that the conventional wisdom in Washington that this is about to come down any second is overblown. I think that there are still cards for Mueller to play, but I do think, Dave, that if he were planning to extend this, you would not be seeing people start to get sentenced now. And I've always thought that if he was building to a larger investigation, the way you build a larger investigation is you get the main guy or you get your cooperators to come in and plead guilty to the big crime that you're trying to pin on the big guy. Instead, what he's done is plead everybody guilty to false statements. And you don't want to build a case by showing the jury that all your witnesses are liars.
But that's really exactly what he's doing
about it. Well, that indicates that he doesn't have a big case at the end of the rainbow. That's my point.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that he's working on is obstruction, and you write a terrific piece in National Review that suggests he doesn't exactly understand obstruction as a charge. Can you explain?
Well, I didn't say, I'm not so much saying he doesn't understand it. The article was about a memo that President Trump's nominee to be the next Attorney General, Bill Barr, who was the Attorney General, by the way, in the Bush 41 administration. So he's a very accomplished guy, formerly head of the Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel, which are the lawyers in the Justice Department. So he writes a very lawyerly scholarly memo to Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, saying that if the public reports of Mueller's theory of obstruction are true, then that obstruction theory is not viable under federal law because it's an extravagant extension of it. What it would say is that instead of traditional obstruction, which is things like tampering with witnesses, tampering with evidence, destroying evidence, things that are innately corrupt, evil acts to try to undermine a proceeding, Mueller's theory would apply to any act of the president, even legitimate exercises of his constitutional prerogatives, if a prosecutor decided that they were improperly motivated. And what Barr says, and I think he's correct about this, is that is not a viable extension or expansion of the obstruction statute.
Andy, it just seems like Mueller is stretching so far, stretching the law in so many different directions in order to make a case against this president. It's like his entire reputation hinges now upon making a charge against the president that will stick instead of the blind search for the truth. This is trying to find something to put on the president. He's filed two indictments against groups of Russians that seem to preclude the possibility of complicity by President Trump. He hasn't charged anyone in any case that even hinted that President Trump did anything wrong. I know people are impatient with the investigation. I'm impatient with the investigation. But at the same time, you can only look at the bottom line of what he's done. And what he's done so far is he hasn't even hinted that President Trump did anything wrong, at least criminally wrong. By the way, Bill Barr, who, again, has been nominated to be the next Attorney General by the president, he wrote this piece. It's somehow the media is trying to turn it into an accusatory, some kind of evidence against him as being the next Attorney General, when in fact it was an offer, it was an 18-page memorandum to kind of help the Justice Department through understanding what the Mueller investigation was about. Did you think it was a good exercise?
Yeah, I really did. I thought it was a very good exercise. And if I were on the other side of this argument, I would take comfort in the fact that Barr comes out expressly and says that we all know that a president can be cited for obstruction. He doesn't take the extreme position that the president is above the law or the president can't be guilty of obstruction. And he never comes close to saying that Mueller's investigation is not legitimate. This is strictly an article that is about a very narrow but important legal issue, which is the obstruction theory as we understand it that the Mueller investigation is pursuing one that is viable under federal law and under the canons of construction of statutes that the Justice Department traditionally employs.
Incredible that it's gone on this long, though. And you think it is wrapping up? You think maybe by the end of February we may have the end of the Mueller investigation?
Dave, one thing I would say is that Mueller is not on anybody's time clock but his own.
That's for sure.
And I think he's going to finish when he's good and ready. There's good reason to think he's winding down, but he's also still got a grand jury open. So I wouldn't put a clock on it right now.
Andy McCarthy, great to see you, my friend. Thank you very much for being here. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Dave. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you, too. And be sure to vote in tonight's poll. Do you believe rhinos and radical Dems will endlessly oppose President Trump's America First effort to protect American sovereignty? Cast your vote on Twitter at Lou Dobbs. And a reminder to follow Lou on Twitter at Lou Dobbs, like him on Facebook, follow him on Instagram at Lou Dobbs Tonight. Coming up next, President Trump reminding Nancy Pelosi that he never had a doubt that wall funding would pass in the House.
When Nancy Pelosi said you'll never get the votes in the House.
There are no votes in the House, a majority vote for a wall, no matter where you start.
We got them, and we got them by a big margin, 217 to 185.
We take up the latest in the president's continued efforts to secure a border wall with political strategist Ed Rollins. He's next.
Business app now.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm David Asman, filling in for Lou Dobbs tonight. We are getting word now from Chad Pergram, our super producer down in Washington. The partial government shutdown will start just after midnight on Saturday. That's because the House of Representatives has adjourned for the day. The House returns on Saturday at noon Eastern, so at least a short one, ladies and gentlemen. we are in a partial government shutdown. Meanwhile, Chief Justice John Roberts today joining the liberal wing of the Supreme Court to deny the Trump administration's request to immediately enforce new asylum rules, barring asylum for anybody crossing in the U.S. outside of an official port of entry. Justices Thomas, Alito, Gorsuch, and Kavanaugh sided with the Trump administration and would have let the order go into effect. Today's ruling comes as the argument over a border wall threatens to shut down part of the government, and at least, as we just reported, it is going to happen at least through tonight. The activity along the southern border with Mexico increases now. For more on what's going on down there, we turn to national correspondent William LaJeunesse.
Today's Supreme Court ruling means the immigrants seen here crossing the border illegally still have a right to claim asylum. The court ruling against an administration policy that required immigrants to seek asylum only at ports of entry. This comes as immigrants grow increasingly desperate. Wednesday, 300 Central Americans jumped vehicle barriers in the Arizona desert, one in the middle of nowhere on an Indian reservation. In El Centro, California, agents track an ultralight, arresting 2 Chinese nationals on landing.
The wall will pay for itself.
The president wants $5 billion for 215 miles of barrier to reduce illegal immigration.
Isn't Mexico supposed to pay for it? Wasn't that the campaign promise? No, that's just another lie.
Democrats may block the president's wall, but they could not stop him from erecting a different kind of barrier in Mexico, requiring asylum seekers to stay there while the U.S. processes their claims.
One, it will decrease illegal immigration, which is what we've been trying to do. 2, it will help us focus on those that have a legitimate claim.
The U.S. apprehended 62,000 illegal immigrants in November, a 60% jump over last year.
The numbers will actually go down substantially because if you need asylum, you can get it in Mexico. If you need a job, you can get a job. So we're really talking only about a very small portion who will continue to feel that they need to get asylum in the United States.
Critics say the policy denies asylum seekers their rights and endangers those waiting in Mexico.
I'm going to ask for asylum there, and I hope that the law or the measure being taken is not true.
The administration hoped the Mexico deal would relieve pressure on an overcrowded immigration system, end catch and release, and deter others. Today's Supreme Court ruling suggests that is not likely to happen. David?
William LaJeunesse, thank you very much. Joining me now is former Reagan White House political director and Fox Business political analyst, Mr. Ed Rollins. So, by the way, it was a very close decision. As I mentioned, it was 5-4 decision. If Donald Trump gets another Supreme Court justice, I mean, we are unlikely to have these split decisions won over by the liberals.
I also think Roberts will be pretty much in the camp of the conservatives. I think today was about process, and he wanted to slow the process down a little bit. So I think we need to get this to the court, and we need to basically have the court reinforce the president's powers on this issue.
Now, what just happened assures that we are in a government shutdown. We will be at 12 midnight tonight. We know that that's going to happen now. The bottom line, though, again, and I know the president has been talking about it, I don't think enough Republicans have been, is that it comes down to security. It's the most important thing a government can do is to make Americans feel secure. That's beyond anything else that our government does. That is at the heart of what it should do. Is Donald Trump winning that argument?
I think he will win the argument, and equally as important, I mean, I'm a big defense proponent. We're spending $700 billion on defense to defend other people, other countries, not necessarily our country. And the idea that you can't spend, the amount of money we need to basically build a wall here is absurd. We need it, and the quicker we get it, the better. And this shutdown is probably going to cost $3 to $5 billion just if it's down for a couple of weeks. So the reality is throw that money in. Let's get going here.
Well, and it's clear that the issue of border security is not what the Democrats are interested in. What they're interested in is preventing Donald Trump from gaining a victory.
Absolutely, and that's the critical thing here. So that's the ultimate test. I think he did absolutely the right thing here. I'm reminded of George H.W. Bush, who broke his tax pledge. And basically lost 27% of the Republicans and a third of the conservatives when he ran for re-election. So,
well, the House did the right thing as well, and from the president's perspective, and I'm just wondering if it's an impossibility in the Senate when you have people like Jeff Flake around speaking ill of any kind of plan that the president
It's an
has.
impossibility when you have the stupid 60-vote rule. I mean, we need to, and particularly now you've got a split House and the Senate, you need to basically make a majority rule in both the House and the Senate.
Was the president close to making some kind of deal that his political base, the president's own political base, would have deserted him on? That is, was Tuesday or Wednesday a make or break thing, and the president decided, look, I just cannot break with my base?
I think that's very true. I don't think they had a good strategy going into this. I think they underestimated the feedback that was going to come from the base, and I think the president was arguing in good faith, and I think he thought he was going to get some kind of a deal because they had promised him a deal, and he didn't get the deal.
Was it because they were caught between chiefs of staff? Perhaps they didn't have the right guidance?
I think that's part of it. I don't think Jared Kushner, who's up there today negotiating, is an experienced Hill guy. He knows how to deal with Democrats. He doesn't know how to deal with Republicans. And I think the key thing here is, once we get our team in play here and move forward, the new chief of staff does know politics. So.
And Mick Mulvaney is the new chief of staff, and he knows politics and he knows the budget. Nobody knows the budget better than he does.
He's a superb choice, and once he gets in there and gets to function, I think it's going to make.
And he can make the numbers work.
He can make the numbers work, absolutely.
I mean, that's the bottom line. Finally, does anyone literally believe that Pelosi or Schumer would keep the border more secure? They claim that the only reason we're against the wall is because there are better ways to do it. But does anybody take that seriously?
No, absolutely not.
Inside the Beltway?
Their rhetoric has been, over the years, has been absolutely anti any kind of control of the border.
Andrew Rollins, good to see you, my friend. Thank you very much.
Merry Christmas.
Coming up next, Merry Christmas to you. China now says cyber espionage is part of its national strategy. We're going to take that up after the break, as well as the latest on trade talks with Asia expert Gordon Chang. Communist China today said it sees cyber espionage as necessary for the national progress, and they won't be ending their hack attacks anytime soon. The announcement coming after state-sponsored Chinese hackers breached the servers of American-based tech companies Hewlett-Packard, IBM, in order to steal trade secrets. In addition to their online threat, new reports tonight suggest China is testing a submarine-launched nuclear missile that could reach North America. It's expected to be ready as early as 2020. White House National Trade Council Director Peter Navarro warning today it will be, quote, difficult for the U.S. and China to make a long-term trade deal by March 1st unless, quote, Beijing was prepared for a full overhaul of its trade and industrial practices. Navarro's comments came from an interview with a Japanese newspaper in which he added, quote, China is basically trying to steal the future of Japan, the U.S., and Europe by going after our technology. Here now to discuss, Gordon Chang, a columnist and author of The Coming Collapse of China and the Nuclear Showdown. Gordon spent almost 2 decades working in Shanghai and Hong Kong, so he knows the region well. Is Navarro right?
Navarro is absolutely right. The Chinese are stealing at the least $225 billion a year in U.S. technology and know-how, probably more than that, maybe 300, who knows. But the point is, this is our future. This is artificial intelligence, 5G wireless communications, quantum computing, quantum communications, all the rest of it. Whoever is able to develop those and commercialize it, they're going to dominate the 21st century.
And, people tend to forget. I think it's because we become so familiar with dealing with the Chinese. We have such a big trade with them that it is a communist country and that the government is not restricted from taking anything it wants from any private company, whether they're Chinese or American, that foreigners that happen to be in China.
Oh, absolutely. And because Xi Jinping, the Chinese ruler, has made the dominance in 10, now 11 sectors of technology, because that's the core of his plan, yes, they've got to steal more and more in order to meet their goals. And so this is now baked into the Chinese system. It was already there, of course, David, but now even more so.
And whereas our technology, again, is based on private sector development, yes, we have some of it. We have NASA and other government agencies that develop some technology, but overwhelmingly, over 90% of our technology is based on private sector development. Theirs, again, it's a communist government. Either it's totally controlled by the government or the government can reach their hands in and take anything they want and use it for themselves. And very often that means using the high-tech technology for military purposes.
Yeah, most of China's programs are run by the state. But, they do have some tech companies. But the problem right now is that Xi Jinping is actually trying to make sure that state enterprises control those private tech companies. You're starting to see they're taking stakes in those tech companies, also putting in Communist Party cells into them. So this is an attempt to dominate by state control and state ownership. So this is total control.
Well, let's talk about one of their so-called private companies, Huawei, the company that we arrested the CFO of. You really can't separate that company from the government's strategic interests. And now there are a couple of banks, HSBC, Standard Chartered, they're foreign banks or foreign-based banks. They have operations here. They are restricting their dealings with Huawei. Do you think others will follow?
No, I think certainly that will be the case because the United States is going to make sure that basically banks and companies make a choice. You either deal with the United States or you deal with Huawei. And so that's going to be very clear for most companies. You're now dealing with a very willful president. And that's important for the Chinese to see. You know, you look at the shutdown, you look at, for instance, Mattis in Syria, you see a president who's going to get his way, and he's not going to stop at anything to do it. The Chinese have got to see this and understand that they haven't seen this before, David, but they're seeing it now.
Now, the Chinese are always trying to do this psychology research on our leaders, trying to find out exactly what motivates them, everything. You're saying that they are looking very carefully of how he is behaving during this shutdown process that we're in now, and that frightens them.
I'm sure that it does. You know, and the other
because of his backbone.
Because of his backbone. You know, and the other thing, you know, and this is sort of a sideshow, the Chinese got to understand that Trump is getting out of the Middle East, he's getting out of Central Asia. That repositions the U.S. military to focus on what's really important, which is the defense of East Asia. So, you know, the Chinese might chortle in the beginning about this. Oh, you know, the U.S. is withdrawing. But no, I think it's repositioning, and they're repositioning on their doorstep.
Now, how does all this affect our trade talks with him? Because clearly, the market was down another 400 points today. It's been down about 2,500 points in the past 6 trading sessions. That's a huge drop. A lot of it has to do with concerns about trade. Does all of this augur well? I mean, they're concerned about what a backbone this guy has, and he's not going to give an inch. Does that mean that we may win the trade battle with him?
Well, I think that we will. I mean, you look at the objective factors like trade deficits, you know, the size of our economy, their dependence on us. All of those factors point to us winning. The only issue that is up in the air is political will. Now, that's the most important factor, David, and it looks like President Trump has it. Now, obviously,
but what about their political will? I mean, this is a guy who's named himself president for life, giving up some of the technology that they were hoping to get their hands on.
More than a trade deal, he needs to win. You know, we say President Trump, you know, president of the U.S., runs for re-election 4 years. Xi Jinping is running for election every day because he owns this trade dispute. He's being blamed for it, which means if he doesn't win, he's out. And if he's out, it means not just losing power, it means losing freedom, maybe even losing more than that, David. So he's got to make sure that he wins, and that is going to be a titanic struggle because you've got 2 important figures. Thank God we've got the economic factors in our favor. But nonetheless, this is an existential struggle because Xi Jinping is actually saying, look, you know, he's dropping hints that China is the world's only sovereign state. You know, President Trump talks about sovereignty. It sort of sounded out of tune when he first said it, but now it's clear. This is important because the Chinese are basically saying, you Americans don't have sovereignty. Trump is saying, yes, we do.
Gordon Chang, good to see you, Gordon. Thank you very much. Coming up next, we are headed for a partial government shutdown, and now it's all on the Dems to come up with funding for a border wall. We'll take that up after the break with Gina Loudon and Florida GOP Chairman Blaise Igollia. While Congress struggles to secure the $5 billion for Trump's border wall, one American is taking matters into his own hands. Air Force veteran and Purple Heart recipient Brian Kolfage started a GoFundMe campaign earlier this week to raise $1 billion for Trump's wall. In just 5 days, it's raised over $13 million due to donations from Americans nationwide. Joining me now, Blaise Igollia. He is the chairman of the Republican Party of Florida, and Gina Loudon, political analyst and member of President Trump's media advisory board. Good to see you both. Oh, also Gina's author of this great book, Mad Politics. You wanted to get that in there, Gina. Blaise, let me go to you first. Absolutely. One of the reasons President Trump was elected clearly was the wall. It ain't for nothing that he said it at virtually every campaign stop he was at. Democrats know this. That's why they don't want to give this piddling amount, $5 billion for the wall. But that's Americans you still see. I mean, this is not just symbolic, this guy who has the GoFundMe account. I mean, there are millions and millions of Americans who voted for President Trump because of the wall.
Yeah, it's not just symbolic. What the Democrats really need to understand that it was a mandate. People of this nation want to secure the borders because this is what happens. You get crime, you get drugs crossing the border. And look, when you put this whole thing into perspective, you're talking about $5 billion out of a $4 trillion budget. It's not that much money. So the Democrats are going to underestimate this issue once again at their own peril like they did in 2016.
I think, Gina, they're also underestimating the intelligence of the American public to figure out what's going on. They all come out with these claims of compassion. You know, we are so compassionate for the children, we're for DACA, for the Dreamers, et cetera, et cetera. What about compassion for the angel moms? What about compassion for all the people who've died from drug overdoses as a result of the extraordinary amount of heroin coming across the border and other drugs that lead to the deaths of people? I mean, where's the compassion there?
Right. And again, this is about action more than words. They can talk about compassion all day long, David, but they're the ones who voted against ending sanctuary cities. They're the ones that voted, against, what am I trying to say? The Kate's Law. That's the one. I couldn't think of the name. Kate's Law. Bless her heart. As moms are approaching Christmas time right now, they're thinking about these angel moms who are forever without their children. And they're wondering, this party that talks all the time about compassion, where have their votes been as crime and drugs and murder pour across our southern border?
So, Blaze, I'm thinking that Schumer and Pelosi believe if they are able to pin a government shutdown on the president, that's going to be enough to destroy, at least temporarily, his hopes for 2020 and perhaps get them more votes in the House and the Senate. I think they may be miscalculated. The last 2013, by the way, we had a shutdown that was blamed on the Republicans, and the Republicans picked up the Senate in 2014. So it doesn't always work the way Schumer and Pelosi say it's going to work.
Mark my words, if there is a government shutdown over securing the border, the Trump rallies in 2020 are going to be bigger than anybody has ever seen. And I want to piggyback on these votes. I know that we're headed towards a government shutdown right now. What I would like to see happen in the Senate right now is take up the House bill with the $5 billion in it. Let them all vote on it right now so we can see and have a record of people who truly stand for securing our borders. And let's see who the people are who are voting against that. And if there are any Republicans who are voting against that, well, let's just hand them switch cards and tell them to switch to Democrat right now, because they're supposed to be campaigning on these issues for years, for decades, some of them. And when it comes time to take the vote, if they vote no, they just need to go away.
Gina, we are at midnight going to be in a government shutdown. It may only last a couple of days, but what's your best guess? How long do you think this goes on?
I think it'll be short because this president is so smart, so measured, and so strategic. He always knows how to use his leverage, and this is no exception to that rule. But I think we have to remember that the Schumer shutdown is not going to reflect on this president, no matter what. This is going to fall right on the hands of the Democrats. And let's remember, too, they're trying to make this big deal out of the shutdown, David. But every single president since Ford has had a shutdown. And Obama's lasted 16 days, I think. Carter's lasted 17 days, if I'm correct. These things happen. So for people to predict 2020 elections out of this, other than them seeing the Democrats for what they really are, I just don't see this falling on the president at all.
Gina Loudon and Blaise Ingoglia, good to see you both. Thank you very much. Have a great weekend.
Good to see you.
Well, on Wall Street, stocks closed lower. The Dow lost 414 points. The S&P was down about 51. NASDAQ losing 195 points. Volume on the big board, 7.2 billion shares. Stocks closed lower to end the week. The Dow lost nearly 7%. This is the worst week the Dow has had in 10 years. The S&P down 7%. The NASDAQ losing over 8% on the week. And a reminder to listen to Lou's reports 3 times a day, coast to coast, on the Salem Radio Network. Up next, more on the Radical Dems' efforts to stonewall the president on securing our borders. Stay with us. We're coming right back. Giving up some of the technology that they were hoping to get their hands on?
More than a trade deal, he needs to win. You know, we say President Trump, president of the U.S., runs for re-election 4 years. Xi Jinping is running for election every day because he owns this trade dispute. He's being blamed for it, which means if he doesn't win, he's out. And if he's out, it means not just losing power, it means losing freedom, maybe even losing more than that, David. So he's got to make sure that he wins, and that is going to be a titanic struggle because you've got two important figures. Thank God we've got the economic factors in our favor. But nonetheless, this is an existential struggle because Xi Jinping is actually saying, look, he's dropping hints that China is the world's only sovereign state. President Trump talks about sovereignty. It sort of sounded out of tune when he first said it, but now it's clear. This is important because the Chinese are basically saying, you Americans don't have sovereignty. Trump is saying, yes, we do.
Gordon Chang, good to see you, Gordon. Thank you very much. Coming up next, we are headed for a partial government shutdown, and now it's all on the Dems to come up with funding for a border wall. We'll take that up after the break with Gina Loudon and Florida GOP Chairman Blaise Iguolia.